بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So inshallah, yes, we can ask questions. You're free to ask questions. Just let's try and make them short, and so we can have short answers as well, and we can try and cover as much as possible. Al-Adhan, so the topic today is Al-Adhan, the call of the prayers. And ما هي حقيقة الأذان? So the first question, this is a very, very beautiful, formatted, structured book. It's based on Khalil. Khalil has been there's a lot of commentaries, and then this contemporary scholar Muhammad al-Arab al-Qurawi rahmatullah alayh, he came in this century, last century. And what he did, he took one of those big commentaries and he restructured it again. He made it simplified for us to use. So the first question is, what is the haqiqah? What is the reality? And what is the ruling of al-adhan? Those are always the first questions that we ask in the fiqh. Haqiqah wal hukm. So al-adhan huwa al-i'lamu bidukhuli waqti as-salah bi alfadhi mashru'a. That's the definition. Al-adhan is the call of the prayer when the time for that particular salah has come in, when that obligatory salah has come in. وحكمه أنه سنة مؤكدة بكل مسجد ولو بتلاصق المساجد. The ruling of calling the adhan is sunnah mu'akkada, so it's a very strong sunnah. Very strong sunnah. ولو for each mosque, even if these mosques are with neighboring each other, like stuck to each other, then that happens. That happens in the Muslim countries. There are so many mosques. Sometimes a mosque is like, and you say, why is this like this ummah is divided? No. You don't have enough space, so you have two mosques, one near the other, and each mosque has the imam. There's no problem, and the adhan is called on each one. In fact, the adhan can be called. There's more than, and we'll see this a little bit later. The adhan can be called in the same masjid by two different mu'adhineen if it's a large masjid, and that happens until today, historically until today. So the adhan is called in those masajids, and it's sunnah mu'akkada for the mosque. بكم شرط يكون سنة مؤكدة. بكم شرط يكون السنة مؤكدة. With which conditions do they become sunnah mu'akkada in these mosques? Okay, here are the answer, and you understand why the question. 5 conditions. أن يكون الجماعة سواء كانت في حضر أو سفر. When we say that it's sunnah mu'akkada, we're not talking about only in the masjid. We're talking about if someone is outside in the park, it becomes sunnah mu'akkada when it is time for the salah. When it's time for salah, سواء كانت في حضر أو سفر, and there is a jama'ah. So there is people around you. There's Muslims around you, and you, of course, in the Muslim country, you don't want to cause disturbances, and you don't want to be a center of attraction when people don't understand what is al-adhan and so on. You want to be very sensitive about that. So you're in a Muslim country, or you're in an environment where Muslims are present, and you call for the adhan, whether you're traveling or whether you are muqim, you are resident. So this is your town, or you're traveling somewhere, and they can hear you. The second condition, when it becomes sunnah mu'akkada, أن تطلب الجماعة غيرها للاجتماع في الصلاة. So we have 2 jama'ats. This is very similar than the first one. So you have one jama'ah here and another jama'ah there. This one calls, the other one joins them. The third one, وأن تكون الصلاة التي أقيم الأذان لها فرضا لا نفلا كالعيد. The other condition for this adhan to be sunnah mu'akkada is that the salah that you are calling for is Salatul al-Farida. Salatul Farida. Okay? أن تكون الصلاة التي أقيمت فرضا. So this is like the Dhuhr or Asr. You don't call the adhan for janazah. You don't call the adhan for a salah which is qada, fa'ita. Like this is asr, but you didn't pray dhuhr, don't call the adhan for praying the dhuhr. You can call the adhan for the asr. So it's for the present present salah. Also Eid, or so janaza, Eid, salat al-fa'ita, you don't call the adhan. It's not sunnah mu'akkada, it's even makruh to call the adhan for those salats. وأن يكون لها وقت محدود فلا يقام الأذان. We said that. Okay. بل وقتها زمن تذكرها في أي زمان. This is very important, very interesting, and it's nice to know that you can call the adhan not just in the beginning. Yes, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said when they asked him أي الأعمال خير, what is the best of the deeds? He said الصلاة على وقتها. قال ثم أي؟ قال بر الوالدين. قال ثم أي؟ جهاد في سبيل الله. The first and the most virtuous of all the deeds is to pray on time. Yes, that's mustahab. But if you pray in the middle of the time, like between dhuhr and asr, you pray dhuhr, instead of praying it at 1:05, you pray it at 3:05 or 4 o'clock, and asr is at 6 o'clock. That's not a problem, or 5 o'clock. You can pray asr, you pray dhuhr half hour before the beginning of asr. That's not a problem. You're still doing it ada'an. And because that is the case, you can call the adhan anytime in that time, in that span or that interval. In fact, in some of the villages, in some farms in the mountains, some people work. They wake up early, they pray fajr, they go out and they work all day, and then they keep working until 2 hours after dhuhr. And that's it. Their day has finished. So they've worked 7 hours, 6 hours on their feet, moving physically. And they have understood between themselves that the adhan should be called only 2 hours after the entrance of al-adhan. That's perfectly fine. You don't say, this is a makruh or bid'ah, or it's against the sunnah. No. So you can call the adhan anytime in between those times. وأن يكون الوقت اختيارا لا ضروريا. That answers, or that's articulates what I've just mentioned. So اختيارا, it's within the time of al-ikhtiyari. So الظهر, الاختياري of الظهر is between ظهر and asr. So أن يكون then becomes سنة مؤكدة. وأن تكون الصلاة مجموعة مع الفرد الاختياري كجمع العصر مع الظهر في عرفة. And if you're praying jama, like dhuhr and asr, it must be called in the time of al-ikhtiyari. Like in Arafat, when you pray dhuhr and asr together, on Arafat you pray dhuhr and asr together, so you call the adhan at the time of dhuhr. The other, come in. Yeah, Sayyid Abdul Rahman, we're going through the adhan again because no one has heard it before.
Okay, sure.
If you don't mind, inshallah. So Abdul Rahman has heard it last week. The other question, so we'll ask the hard questions to Shaykh Abdul Rahman. أن يكون مندوبا أو مكروها أو. So this action, this ibadah, or this act of al-adhan falls under all these rulings of al-ibadat, which is, it could be wajib, it could be sunnah mu'akkada, it could be manduba, it's accepted, it's not fard or makruh, but it could be makruh, so it could become wajib at certain times, it could become makruh at certain times. What are these different conditions and situations where it becomes mandub or makruh or wajib? ويندب الأذان للمنفرد في السفر. يندب, okay? يندب, it's الندب is al-istihbab. Al-istihbab is highly desirable to do something. It's highly desirable for a person to do it when they're traveling. And we know that beautiful hadith where the Prophet ﷺ told the companion, you love to be with your sheep. So when the time comes in, call the adhan because call the adhan because your voice, there's the jinns and the jinns and the things that hear your voice anywhere will witness for you on the day of judgment. So it becomes your call for the adhan becomes like inshallah a witness for you on the day of judgment. يندب الأذان للمنفرد في السفر وللجماعة. So it's mustahab that this person does it even if they're alone. للمنفرد, even if you're alone and you're in the desert or in the farm or you're just traveling. وللجماعة التي تطلب غيرها في السفر أيضا. That one was covered earlier. It's highly desirable to call the adhan if you're calling another jama'ah. It becomes makruh in the following conditions. للمنفرد في الحضر. Okay, the person who is alone while he's resident, and that applies for the person who is alone in his house. Someone who is alone in his house doesn't have to call the adhan. No one will hear him. Of course, the walls will witness it for you, and the voice will witness your voice, and inshallah, will be the witnesses for you on the day of judgment, inshallah. It says that it is makruh, okay? It is makruh. وَيُكْرَهُ لِلْمُنْفَرِدِ فِي الْحَضَرِ. You're totally alone and you're not traveling. And inshallah, I beg to differ with this, especially for us who live in this it's not an Islamic environment. We don't hear the adhan outside. We don't have an opportunity to listen to the adhan and then make the dua. So if you call the adhan at home, even if you're alone, you have to say, you have a chance to say the dua at the end of the adhan. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والدرجة الرفيعة وابعثه المقام المحمود الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. And there's a lot of virtues in saying this dua. There's a lot of beautiful virtues, and there's another dua. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا. So this gives you the opportunity, even if you're alone. I highly recommend it, and I differ here, and it's okay. These rulings are subject to changes depending on the conditions of the society, and it's case per case. The second condition where it is not desirable to call the adhan, وللجماعة المحصورة في مكان لا تطلب غيرها. If a jama'ah is mahsura, and this, may Allah protect all of us, if people, and I've seen it, like I've seen this and I've experienced it. I've visited people in jail, and we were 6 of us. That's the maximum we can be together, and there were Muslims at the other end. So we called the adhan, but they didn't hear us. So if they were able to hear us, it would be makruh, because you're calling them and they're not able to respond to your call. So it's makruh. وَلِلصَّلَاةِ الْفَائِتَةِ. The salat al-fa'ita. So now it's dhuhr. Now it's dhuhr, and you haven't prayed fajr. So you have to make up your fajr, or you have to make up the fajr for a year ago, because you're making up those salawats as time goes on. You don't call the adhan. By the way, when you are making up a salah, let's say now it is dhuhr, and you have to make up maghrib and isha and fajr. You have to pray maghrib and isha and fajr before dhuhr. And when you pray maghrib and isha and fajr, you pray them exactly as they are, meaning jahran. So you recite them loud, exactly the way that you pray your maghrib, with your loud voice, not whispering. You pray it in that way, okay? And keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind. That and if you were traveling yesterday, and you're making up that salah, and because you were traveling, you only arrived in the morning, then you make it up qasran. See, so you make it up exactly as it was. So if you're a traveler and it's Maghrib and Isha, you make it up as a traveler, and you pray 3 and 2 for Maghrib and Isha. So there's no adhan for as-salatul fa'ita, the past salah. I said, I mean, it's makruh to call the adhan for those salawats. And it's makruh للصلاة التي دخل وقتها الضروري. This is very similar to this one, to what we've just mentioned, because if you haven't, let's say you have an excuse of praying Dhuhr and Asr at the time of Asr because you're sick, or let's say an old person, and this happens a lot. This happens a lot, especially in the summer. The old person prays Maghrib at Maghrib time, and then they pray Isha right after because they need to sleep. They're very tired, and they have to go to bed. I'll stop here. What did you want to say, Sayyid Abdurrahman?
I had a question about now I get it. It's easier to do the qasr, jama' qasr, the way if you missed Dhuhr and Asr, it's easy. Like even if you missed it and then you go into the night, you need to make it up. You pray it as it is, like Isha and Maghrib. Let's say you do Isha and you were traveling, and you didn't pray Isha and Maghrib, but you got to your destination and you haven't prayed Isha and Maghrib. Do you do Qada or not? Jama' sorry, Qada. You do Qada. Sorry, but do you do Jama' Qasr on it?
You arrive before Fajr.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, if you arrive before Fajr, which is the Tarari time.
Yeah, you arrive before Fajr, let's say at 2 or 3 in the morning, and you haven't prayed Maghrib and Isha. You pray Maghrib and Isha as is, not as a traveler, because you arrived and you're a resident now before Fajr.
And I know this is a dumb question, but that holds for the ikhtiyari time as well.
Yes. If you arrive and we're talking about الوقتين المشتركتين, الوقت المشترك, which is between Dhuhr and Asr or Maghrib and Isha. If you arrive before Maghrib and you haven't prayed Dhuhr and Asr, you pray Dhuhr and Asr as a resident, because now you've arrived and you can do Jam'ah, but because you're traveling, but you do the full 4 rak'at for Dhuhr, the full 4 rak'at for Asr, because it's still not Maghrib. But if you've traveled and you haven't prayed Dhuhr and Asr, and you were a traveler, you arrived after Maghrib, you're doing Qada, but you're doing Qada 2 and 2, Jam'a Qasr. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the one more thing is that, so like you said, like if you're sick and an old person,
yeah,
he can combine the Maghrib and Isha.
He can combine Maghrib and Isha, even if it's done every day.
Every day. So same thing can be applied, like, like the places like Fort McMurray in the northern area, like the June, July become very tough.
Yeah.
Like the Isha is very late.
Yeah.
For that time, for that duration of month or two, can they combine Salah or no?
Yeah, inshallah,
Sorry.
I'll get to that, inshallah. Bismillah ta'ala. Jazakallah khair. So the person, the old person, we're talking about someone who has an excuse. It could be this case, but this is a very simple and an obvious excuse. The old person who needs to pray Maghrib and Isha before sleeping. At the time of Maghrib, the adhan may be called at Maghrib, but it may not be called for Isha at the time of Maghrib. It's Tamil al-Tirari. You don't call the adhan. It's makruh to call the adhan for Isha at the time of Maghrib, even though you're praying Isha. وأن يكون الوقت اختياريا لا ضروريا وأن تكون الصلاة مجموعة مع الفرد الاختياري كجمع العصر مع الظهر في عرفة. Sorry, I was reading something before that. Okay, that's the wrong statement here. Let's وللصلاة التي دخل وقتها الضروري. This is what we've just explained about the old people who should not call the adhan for Maghrib and Isha. The fifth one, which is makruh, ولصلاة الجنازة. الصلاة الجنازة, you don't call the adhan for that. Yes?
Can I comment? Some people, they say it's already been called as soon as the child is born. That was the kind of interpretation.
Allahu Akbar, that's very nice, beautiful. I love that. Yeah. But shar'an, like hukman, hukman, but spiritually, yes, it has already been called. That's beautiful.
As soon as the child is born. Yeah.
That's right. So Salatul Janaza, it's makruh to call the adhan, and it's also makruh to do iqamah. We will see that in a minute. وَلِلنَّافِلَةِ كَالْعِيدِ وَالْكُسُوفِ. Again, the same thing. Okay, so it's not haram, but it's makruh to call the adhan for Eid. You know, you would hear sometimes some people call it in a certain way. And kusuf as well. Kusuf is the eclipse of the sun or the eclipse of the moon.
How about the salat of rain? Can you call it?
No.
Not for the rain too. Okay.
No. So salat al-kusuf in the Malikiya, they don't say khusuf. Even though they're how do you call that? Mutaradifatan. They are synonymous almost.
No.
Okay, al-kusuf al-khusuf, the eclipse of the solar of the sun and the eclipse of the moon, can be the same word could be used for either or. But if you only use one, it should be both. But in the Maliki Fiqh we only use one because we only do the eclipse of the moon. We don't do the eclipse of the sun.
Okay.
والله أعلم. ويجب في المصري هي كفاية. Okay, I'm not going to say the entire statement here because I don't want to get it recorded. But in the Misr, like in the land, let's say we are in an island where there's only one. This is just a simplified example where there's only one city and the Muslims are living there and no one is calling the adhan. It's wajib for one. It's at least wajib for one to call the adhan. It must be called. If Muslims are there, it must be called. It's wajib. That's where it becomes wajib. So it's sunnah mu'akkada. It could be mandub, mustahab, or it could be makruh, but it becomes wajib if you're the only person calling it. Okay, and it's called kifaya. وَيَجِبُ كِفَايَةً, meaning if one does it, it becomes sunnah mu'akkada for the rest. Okay, but okay, wajib kifaya or fard kifaya. Fard kifaya for at least one mosque or one person to call the adhan for the sake of all the land. All clear so far? So far, alhamdulillah, 27 minutes, not too bad, mashallah. Let's move on to the next question. ما هي الألفاظ الأذان وما هو نظامها في النطق بها? What do we say in the adhan? I remember reading in the book of Imam Ibn Abd al-Barr al-Qurtubi, Kitab al-Istidhkar, Sharh al-Muwatta. He goes into details in a few pages about the different variations of al-adhan. So there are many variations of al-adhan. What we know today is only one variation. In the Malikiyya it says يقول المؤذن بصوت مرتفع, and this is the adhan that was inherited by the companions in Medina من عمل الأهل المدينة. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Okay, so you call the adhan Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. You hear that? And then you say it with the mu'adhin. You might not hear him because he's on the microphone, but if you're close to him, he will say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Then he goes on the microphone or with a loud voice saying what you know about the adhan. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala al-falah, Hayya ala al-falah. And if it happens to be al-fajr, he says as-salatu khayru min al-nawm, as-salatu khayru min al-nawm, and he ends like we all know, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. So there's two differences here. We don't say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. We say Allahu Akbar once. When you hear the mu'adhin, he says Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. You say that twice, right? In the Malikiyya you say Allahu Akbar.
That's the one time, okay.
And the second time is the same thing. Allahu Akbar once. And the second difference is is when you finish these two Allahu Akbar, you do a tarjih. It's called a tarjih. You say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu Muhammad Rasulullah in a very soft voice, and then you continue with the adhan and you complete it. فألفاظ الآذان كلها مثنى إلا جملة لا إله إلا الله فمنفردة والآذان ساكن أواخر الجمل والآذان ساكن في أواخر الجمل. The adhan, you don't say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. It's sukun at the end. Okay. The next question: ما هو الحكم إذا وقع فصل بين جملة مذكورة? This is a very simple question. What happens if you start calling the adhan and you take a break? As long as the break is not long, then it's okay. But if it's too long, you repeat from scratch. Next question: في أي حالة يحرم الأذان? So we saw الأذان which is مؤكدة, sunnah مؤكدة, wajib, and so on. Now they're asking, when is it haram to call the adhan? يحرم قبل دخول الوقت. It is haram to call the adhan for, let's say, dhuhr. Okay, it's 12:30. You go to the minara, and called the adhan for dhuhr. That's haram because you are making people do something which is إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا, and you are responsible. The mu'adhin has a responsibility to inform others about the time of salah. Allah in the Quran says, إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا. And you could see the gravity of this. It's haram in Ramadan when the adhan is called for iftar or for imsak. So imagine if you're calling the adhan before the time of iftar, you're making people break their fast, right?
Wow, okay.
Or you're calling the adhan after the time of Fajr, so they're making imsak way later. So it's a huge responsibility. The mu'adhin has a huge, and there is a hadith which I cannot recall right now. الإمام مؤتمن المؤذن something والإمام مؤتمن. Inshallah, I remember this hadith and I will share it with you. It's a beautiful and very important hadith about the responsibility of the mu'adhin and the responsibility of the imam. So when is it haram to call the adhan before the time of salah? Except for which salah? You may answer if you want. Except for which salah? Except for Fajr. So we do it in the day in the time of a sahar. Okay, like they say in Urdu, sari.
Okay.
So that's when you want to do your suhoor, or when you have to wake up to do your qiyam. You pray your Fajr and you pray your Shafa and Witr. So you can call the adhan. That's called the first adhan and the second adhan. So the first, and in many places in the Muslim world, and now it's still being done. There is the first adhan. You wake up, you do your wudu, you pray your qiyam. It's incredible. People are still practicing this. It's not far-fetched. It's not forgotten, alhamdulillah. And then the second adhan is called. But at that time, you leave the house, you walk to the mosque, you pray your Fajr. Fajr is the sunnah, and you wait for the iqamah to pray subh with the imam. The next question. ما الذي and the adhan for the Fajr, the right adhan for the Fajr is called al-Fajr al-Sadiq, because there's two types of al-Fajr. There's al-Fajr al-Kadhibi wal-Fajr al-Sadiqi. There is the al-Kadhibi is the wrong one, or the one that fools you. It's not real, and that's like a vertical. It's a vertical light above you in the night. Al-Adhan al-Sadiq is a horizontal one that comes at the horizon, and it's very clear. The person who sees that light when it's very dark and you can see it, it's very clear that the Fajr has come in. Next question: ما الذي يشترط في المؤذن لصحة الآذان وما الذي يندب له? What is the conditions of validity for the adhan to be called? Who is the mu'adhin? the mu'adhin needs to have 4 conditions. The first one, he has to be a Muslim. A kafir cannot have a beautiful voice and call the adhan for Muslims. We're happy that the kafir calls the adhan, but a Muslim has to call, even if the voice is not nice and so. The second one, he must be male. So we cannot have an adhan called by a woman. The third one is al-aql, فَلَا يَصِحُّ مِنْ مَجْنُونَ, someone who has temporary insanity, or someone who does not know what he's saying. The adhan is not that's not a condition for him. So we don't accept that as a condition for his validity to call the adhan. The fourth one, دخول وقت الصلاة, and we've mentioned that earlier. So the condition also is that the time has to be in. It has to be in. So maybe I'll finish this and we'll be done, inshallah. والعقل ودخول الوقت يصح قبل الوقت إلى خصوصي ويصح من الصبي ويصح من الصبي, and it's acceptable from a young person. الصبي is someone who's not puber, especially who is very, very young, but who can discern. He's mashallah, there's very bright young people at the age of 4 or 5 who know what they're saying, and they know what they're doing, and they call the adhan. Their voice is beautiful, and it comes for them. It's a beautiful experience to hear a young person call the adhan. It is perfectly acceptable for that young person to call the adhan, as long as he relies on someone who is dependable on the timing. So, a 4 or 5 years old may not know when the time for salah has come in. So he has to be dependable on someone who is reliable for the schedules for salah. So it's perfectly acceptable for. وَيُنْدَبُ, and it is mustahab. So يَصِحُ, it's permissible, and now it's highly desirable to call the adhan. What is highly desirable for someone who calls the adhan? For someone who calls the adhan, you have to have tahara. Okay, you have to have your wudu. You have to have a beautiful voice. In the Maliki, we've discussed last time that it is not necessary to be melodic. In fact, it is not desirable, but in other schools it is desirable to have a melodic sound. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, like that. But in the Maliki, it's not a requirement. So, on wudu, a beautiful strong voice, and you have to be above somewhere so that others can hear you, or using a microphone. Standing, not sitting down. So if you're sitting down and you're able to stand, it is makruh, and you should be facing the qibla. Unless the people who are hearing you are behind you, and you cannot project your voice, so you turn yourself towards them so they can hear you. And then inshallah we'll stop here. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi.